John actually gave us some really good stuff at the end. So we'll leave you as the last speaker, John. David, start with you and then we'll just go across.
I was hoping you'd ask somebody else.
All right, so from my perspective, it's the integration of information, not the integration of data, it's the integration of information in a timely fashion for disaster management, which is always the critical component, and getting that information to the right people in sufficient time. So telecommunications is part of that problem. As John mentioned, it's also a situational awareness and all of those other things. But the integration of data, leading to reliable information is the serious challenge.
Thank you. Perhaps as we go along, if there is any questions that the experts wish to ask of the speaker in the first instance, and any comments that you'd like to actually make as an editing to that. But otherwise, we'll just keep going.
Sure, I was just going to say that I absolutely agree with you. I think that we have a lot of data sources today. There can still be improvements on that, but the greatest challenge is what we do with that data and how we make it usable. And more than just making it as usable data products, I think presented in a way that the users can manage it. They're not interested necessarily in where the data comes from. They just want the nugget of information they need to do whatever the job it is that they need to do. But that with that in mind, the people providing that information need to also be able to trace it back to where that data came from to make sure it's actually relevant, and that's not easy to do. And looking at the way disasters managed in Australia today, and I'm quite new to the topic, it seems to be quite disaggregated. There's a lot of experts in their own domains. There's a lot of different activities and different competencies and different processes occurring between the states and the territories. And we need better alignment so that we don't get confused, so that we understand what information we're actually using and how that flows through to what people are going to use it to make decisions on.
Very true, thank you.
I think most important thing that we all learned as kids is that prevention is better than cure. So you want to start looking at how do I prevent something before it happens. And there is so much to learn from the data that now with the machine learning and all these things that is coming up, one most important thing is that when you take data from many sources, data homogenization is a big deal, because we are now getting data from all the way from geo to drones. So how do you homogenize data and you are able to view that in real time? How do you map all of them in different resolutions and different bands and things like that? And that needs to be seen. At the same time, for disaster management, and especially I heard about the water quality, one of the things is that you need to start working on building up a science support groups, which are like looking at scientific committees, looking at what can we do to improve this data that we have today, and what kind of a data is really needed to achieve the goal. So I think one has to start from ground up, building up the groups and infrastructures.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. This may sound very similar, but I think early mission planning in terms of ensuring that environmental monitoring is an essential part of the mission development. In fact, within NASA, in the Earth Science Directorate, we have a program which focuses on applications and human impact. And many of the missions that we're developing now, such as the NISAR Large Radar mission, even SMAP, which we talked about before, as part of the mission definition, environmental monitoring issues are built into the design. Because it can be very different trying to adapt observations from existing missions without that pre-planning in an effective way. But if you're moving, as you start to build more flight missions, as you incorporate that with mission design, you could address a lot of challenges early on.
And also addressing the collateral uses of data.
Exactly. And there are many other areas. We talked a lot about the fire and the impacts on aerosols and things of that nature. For many years, I did a lot of work in solid earth deformation and earthquake forecasting, and that's an area where as well, from radar data, there was interest in SAR and other things of that nature, you can build in.
Terrific, thank you.
It's always difficult once you're getting all the way along the line. People have said, oh, that would be good. There's two things.
But you can challenge what they say.
Nobody's, they're all very sensible comments. There's two things I think I'd like to concentrate on. One would be prediction, right? So all the data in the world is fine, but if it's only telling you what's happened, it's not that useful. And I think in particular we see with the kind of smoke issues that we've seen recently, the prediction has been mixed, I think. And so our ability to predict and then allow people to make changes to what they're going to do based on those predictions, I think is going to be critical. And the second thing, which really feeds into the ability to predict and to understand, is the temporal resolution question, right? And so, I mean, if we are going to be able to use AI and machine learning and things like this, and to be able to predict what's going to happen on relatively short timescales in disasters, obviously things often do move quickly, then having really much better temporal resolution in the data that we've got is going to be critical, and that's where things like constellation of small satellites, for example, can really help.
Fantastic, thank you, Sarah. John?
So I might comment on two separate things. One is emergency management, a long time associated with that. And in a way, I think with the American experience here, the missing element is FEMA. Because when you understand the Federal Emergency Management Agency has learned some very harsh lessons over the last couple of decades in terms of fabulous information, very poorly used. And now they turn to how they can, and now they've turned it around, but now they talk about walking the extreme of the extremes type thinking, not what you've seen, but what you could imagine. If you plan for what you've seen, you won't be ready to move when you see something that you've never seen before. So that's their lesson. And when I reflect upon the Australian experience of what we're doing here and being in a national, the equivalent of a NOAA in the room, we don't really have the NASA experience in Australia. So what we do instead is we leverage all of our partnerships in terms of trying to bridge that capability. So that to me is the landscape in terms of understanding what an environmental agency is trying to do in Australia and bridging into the emergency management of trying to support the equivalent of FEMA, the emergency services agencies and the like in the EMA. And yeah, so that's that part. In the process, I've managed to forget the other thing I was going to talk about. But I suppose I'm just conscious of that sort of story about emergency management, being able to understand that you can have incredible information on the ground, but if people don't know how to use it or haven't perceived, oh, I do know what those things now. So then they've got a problem. But reflecting on just the type of hazards that you're talking about here, I just mentioned that in bushfires, more people die in the heat wave ahead of the bushfires than in the bushfires. You get a lot of environmental damage, incredible structural damage, and it's eye candy for cameras and the like, and it's got all the TV and all the attention. But you don't get the data out until years after because it takes the epidemiology. The health system protects the individual, so therefore it's very difficult to get the data out. In all probability, more people die again in the smoke. So, what's your value proposition? Where do you want to go and work? What is it that you want to deliver to the Australian community? You know, in some respects, I think smoke is a real possibility in terms of, and I'm sitting in front of grants at the moment put up by incredible people in the emergency health sector, where the Bureau's hoping to be a good partner, but some of the challenges we've got is, you know, we probably need other partners that can help us package that smoke data so that we can actually be very effective in developing an awareness so that people understand what they're trying to manage.
Fantastic, thank you. Sarah, sorry, yeah, please